Hello, today we're going to talk about a topic I'm very passionate about, which is bash scripting for offensive and defensive security. When you talk about pen testing or defensive security, you hear very often mentioned some languages like Python, Ruby, and other ones, with reason because they're very powerful. However, Bash is readily available in Unix Linux operating systems and also in Windows 10 now if you install it. And it leverages native Unix Linux commands, so you don't necessarily need to be a coder for you to be a way to use a bash script for pen testing. You only need to be familiar with Unix Linux command line. Here is a bash script I created a while ago called peoplefinder.bash, which practically grabs the first and last name of a person, stores them to two different variables, and returns the results I can find about that person based on a series of specialized search engines. Here's an example of the outcome from the script. Let's now create another script based on a previous script I used called ipchecker.bash, and I'm going to explain you why I used the previous script. What I want to do is to grab an IP address, validate it, and that's why I used the previous script. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. And then perform a series of commands on this IP address that allows me to have a little more knowledge about the target. Especially, we're performing four different commands, namely nslookup, dig, whois, and host. We're redirecting the output from these four different commands to a file, and we're storing the file name to a variable called output. In fact, we're prompting the user for the file name at the start. So if you see, I'm trying to kind of isolate the output from each single command by adding series of lines. However, the output from the four commands tend to be too bulky. You can't tell which one is which, and though you must make sure your script works, that's not your only concern when you want to use it for information security purposes. You need to make sure the output from your script to be as neat and clear as possible for who gotta use it. Otherwise, it's pretty much pointless. You'll see there's simply too much information. That's not gonna work. In fact, even if we try to use a different file format, I'm using here XML, the results aren't very different. By the way, I added a message for the user informing that all the commands were successfully performed. It's always a good practice to return a message to the user, both in case of success and in case of problems, because Unix Linux commands tend to be pretty much not chatty, so you need to add a little bit of verbosity to help the user understand what's going on. What I want to do here is change the structure of the script in a way that instead of having one bulky output file, we're going to have four different output files, and accordingly we're going to have four different output variables. so that each individual command will be redirected to an individual file. We're going to be able to understand which one is which, and we don't have to add lines or other stuff. It will be immediate. Okay, so all we had to do is to add two more lines like this, because we need to have 4 different output files and 4 different output variables. Like I said, it makes much more sense to me this way, and even because you may think to redirect the output of these commands to a specific folder containing all the relevant files for your pentesting engagement or your analysis. So that makes much more sense, and it's much more useful for anybody who later on has to retrieve these files and read them. Now, instead of having one single heading at the start of this bulky file, we're going to have 4 different headings, each one for each single file. And in the heading, we're going to tell what command was performed, what the P address was about, who performed it, and when. So we're going to have 4 different headings, one for each command. At this point, I don't need these dotted lines anymore at the end of each command, because we know what command we're talking about, so I'm gonna delete them. You'll notice a sleep 2 command. I introduce a 2-second pause between each command. That's to make sure each command is performed, because normally when you run a command, the output is returned and the shell exits. So let's now run this command one more time and we'll see if it looks good. Let's enter a random IP address. If it was invalid, it would be refused by the script. Now you notice we're asked for 4 different output files. I'm going to name each output file based on the command we're going to perform, so we know which one is which, and it's much clearer. Like I said, you might think of creating a specific folder for your pentest, so I redirected all the files to the root folder, but you can specify a different file path. The script was successfully executed, so all we need to do now is check the output to see if it looks good. That doesn't mean anything because, like I said, I used a random IP address and I ran the script with other IP addresses and it worked fine, so it doesn't mean anything. We'll see that Each individual file starts with a heading saying which command was performed on which IP address by who and when. I think this is a very good piece of information here that you need to have. Let's now have a look at the other two commands. Now, especially whois has a very bulky output normally. You notice a bunch of information. And you notice the personalized heading. Now it's referred to the whois command, of course. And this is the output of the txt file of the host command. Alright, so I hope you guys enjoyed that. The script will be available on GitHub. I'm gonna post a link in my blog